This is San Francisco's stunning Coit Tower, a slender, fluted Art Deco column. Coit Tower emblematically serves as a communication beacon. Greetings and welcome to another detailed paranormal production. Today we offer you the paranormal details of documented historical accounts of spirits utilizing communication technology to communicate with the living. Speaking openly, the producer had an extraordinary and deeply personal experience many years ago in the form of a message from his deceased fiancée, which I shall subsequently share with you. Details of the history. Ever since Samuel Morse and Guglielmo Marconi invented the electrical telegraph and early radio systems, respectively, there have been consistent reports of inexplicable communications, signals, voices and messages being transmitted through these advanced devices. It has been evinced that those machines were sporadically utilized for at least one alternative function: communication from the dead. As our communication technology has evolved, moving from electrical signals to voice transmission to recorded sound to image and eventually into digital systems, reports of contact from the dead followed that same path, appearing again and again through the very tools designed to connect the living to one another. Long before the advent of technology, spirits spoke to the living through human conduits. In 1848, inside a farmhouse in Hydesville, New York, Maggie and Kate Fox sat in a quiet room as mysterious, sharp knocks began to echo through the walls. The origin of the sounds were unknown. The knocks came in precise intervals, spaced in a way that drew attention and held it. When they asked out loud if something was present, a single knock answered. They continued asking questions. The responses followed with consistent timing, forming a pattern that matched conversation. Katie called out, concurrently clapping her hands and saying, "Do as I do." The knocking sound replied as instructed. Then Maggie called out, but instead of clapping her hands, she only gestured. Yet the knocking sounds responded correctly, to which she said, "They can see as well as hear." A variety of questions were asked, each time the knocks responded in counted sequences, allowing letters to be formed one by one. The answers were always correct. One evening, the girls asked the identity of the phantom. A name emerged. Details followed, describing a man who was murdered in the house many years ago. In other locations, spirit communication appeared through automatic writing. Individuals sat with pen and paper, and after a while, the person involuntarily formed words across the page, sentences developing without pause. Some wrote unknown names and dates that were later verified. Others produced entire passages that carried a consistent tone with a definite purpose. Also known as spirit writing or spontaneous writing. The act of a spirit employing the hands of a corporeal being in order to convey a message to the world of the living. Automatic writing eventually evolved into a communication channel with which spirits could shape language through manipulated physical movement, imparting their thoughts for varied motives. The structure already existed: spirit's intention followed by physical response, communication shaped through timing. When machines arrived, they carried that structure forward. By the late 19th century, telegraph lines carried Morse code messages across great distances through electrical pulses. Operators spent long hours listening to the rhythm of signals, translating patterns into words, developing a sensitivity to timing that quite remarkably allowed them to actually recognize the individual senders. During quiet shifts, especially at night, some operators began recording signals that appeared without any scheduled transmission. Sending Morse code telegraph messages without prior authorization was against established protocol. Engaging in this action without prior permission in the 19th and early 20th century was met with severe punishment, with both financial fines and imprisonment. One evening, a 22-year veteran telegraph engineer in Evansburg, Pennsylvania, described sitting at his home, where he was sent to repair a defective telegraph receiver that had neither batteries nor a connection to the system, when the device inconceivably began to click into life at steady intervals. Although stunned, he transcribed the sequence as it formed, translating the pattern into letters that spelled out the name of a colleague who had recently passed away. He later described the scene as follows: "With fear and trembling, I responded through the key, tapping a message into the line. Then the signal returned, forming a reply that aligned directly with my message. The exchange continued for several minutes." He continued, "In as clear and perfect Morse code as I have ever heard, maintaining rhythm and structure before gradually slowing and stopping, the invisible person wrote, 'Do you get me?' I was so overcome that I involuntarily answered yes, without typing it on the sending unit." He continued, "The unknown entity heard me, for again it began to write. It wrote, 'Thank God, my name is Charles Blake. I am an old-timer. My parents who live in Iowa have lost me. They don't know of my fate. I want you to write to my father, Homer Blake, and inform him that I died in Texas of yellow fever. I have forgotten the date, but it was several years before this communication." In another account, an operator working a rural line recorded a repeating signal that appeared late at night over several shifts. The pattern spelled out the same name and location each time it appeared. Days later, news arrived describing a death that matched both the name and the place contained in the signal. The operator compared his notes to the report, finding the details aligned in sequence and timing. A separate report described a disconnected line showing activity on the receiver, the instrument moving as a signal formed. The sequence repeated with consistent rhythm, maintaining structure across multiple intervals. Similar patterns were reported across different stations, each operator recording sequences that carried the same pacing and structure. The signals moved through electricity, forming language through timing alone, shaping exchanges that followed the structure of conversation. Chapter 4. Details of the telephone. The return of the voice. Among the various technological conduits covered here, the telephone represents the most prevalent medium, by far, through which discarnate entities choose to communicate with the living. As telephones entered homes, communication shifted into direct voice, bringing a sense of immediacy and recognition. Individuals reported answering calls where the voice on the line carried familiar tone, familiar cadence, the sound of someone known to them, despite their awareness that the person had long since perished. In one early account from England, shortly after the death of her sister, a woman's phone began to ring at the same time every evening. But when she answered, all she would hear was hissing and static, then a dial tone. However, that soon changed. Answering her phone again at the identical time, she could now hear the faint voice of a woman, then nothing. This culminated soon after. Upon answering it on this occasion, she heard the clear and distinct voice of her late sister. She was speaking calmly and confidently, offering reassurance in a brief and composed message. Then her sister said, "I love you, I shan't phone again." Then the line fell silent. In 1968, Ethel Owens received a call from her close friend Lee. To Ethel, Lee seemed distraught. Then Lee said, "Ethel, I feel really bad." Mrs. Owens later discovered that at the precise time that her friend Lee had phoned, she was in a deep coma. Lee died a few days later. In 1978, Madeline White received multiple calls from her friend Edie over many days. Several days later, she contacted Edie's husband. She was shocked to discover that Edie had passed away 3 days before Ethel had received the first call from her friend. The landline in the basement case. This case has been cited in many publications as classic impossible contact. A family began receiving calls where the caller ID displayed the name and number of their recently deceased grandmother. Seeing as the grandmother's phone should have been disconnected or at least turned off, the family investigated. They discovered that the actual cell phone making the calls had been in a sealed moving crate in the basement of her former home. The phone was not only physically inaccessible, it was completely powered off and also isolated from its inoperative battery. When the family answered the phantom calls, there was never a voice, only a rhythmic static. The timing of the calls usually coincided with significant family discussions or moments of intense grieving concerning the deceased grandmother. This fact caused the family to believe that their beloved grandmother was once again taking her place as the family matriarch, only now in the form of a spirit. In another case, a business office reported a telephone ringing after the end of business hours. When answered, a calm voice asked for an employee who had passed away weeks earlier. The voice repeated the name with steady tone. Then the line went silent. Several individuals in attendance during the call described the same voice, the same pacing, the same phrasing. The interaction carried identity through sound alone, forming recognition through tone and speech. Further, in this documented case, a researcher recounted the occurrence of when a Mr. Owens of Ohio received an urgent call for help from a friend. However, when he asked his friend what his location was, there was no reply. The time was 10:30 p.m., the exact time his friend was pronounced dead at a local hospital. The truly compelling case of Annabella Cardoso's ITC network, Rio de Tempo. Dr. Annabella Cardoso, a former high-ranking Portuguese diplomat, is one of the world's most respected figures in modern ITC research. Beginning in the late 1990s, Cardoso began receiving clear, anomalous voices over radio frequencies in her private laboratory in Spain. These came first through her cell phone and later through her computer. The communicators identified themselves as a group called Rio de Tempo, claiming to operate from a dimension beyond our own time. Direct radio voices, DRV. Unlike typical EVPs, where voices are only heard upon playback, Dr. Cardoso specialized in DRV, where she engaged in live two-way conversations with these entities in real time. These communicators asseverated that survival of consciousness is an unalterable natural law that applies to all living beings and not just human beings. The entities described their own bodies of being comprised of a form of electricity or pure energy that allows them to manipulate our electronic devices. Dr. Cardoso founded the ITC Journal, a publication dedicated to the scientific study of these phenomena, aiming to bridge the gap between paranormal experiences and technical scientific research. The captivating case of the technician. This is one of the most enigmatic and influential figures in the history of instrumental transcommunication, ITC. I've added this to the telephone communication classification because the ITC device is related to the telephone. In essence, it is a communication device for entities. Unlike the deceased human relatives or scientists typically reported in this genre, the technician is described as a high-level, non-human entity. The technician is identified as a prominent supernatural being who had never lived a human life on Earth or anywhere else. It appeared as a technical overseer, coordinating communications between the physical world and the other side. The Euro Signal Bridge, ESB. The technician provided direct technical instructions for the assembly of the ESB, a complex system of electronic devices used in Luxembourg. The Timestream Research Group. The entity was most active with the Timestream Group, based in Luxembourg in the 1980s and 90s. It purportedly collaborated with Dr. Swejan Salter, described as a deceased scientist from another physical world, to manage these communication portals. The technician also facilitated contact with Station Lifeline, another group of spirit-side researchers identified as deceased scientists. The communications from the technician typically bypassed personal sentiment, focusing instead on the mechanics of the universe and the ethics of technology. The entity frequently emphasized that the success of the bridge depended as much on the emotional and spiritual harmony of the human experimenters as it did on the physical equipment. Cosmic laws, messages often discussed selectons, tiny particles described as the building blocks of reality, and the idea that the universe is sustained by an inertia of normality. Survival as law. It taught that consciousness survives death as a natural law of the universe, applicable to all living beings, and that technology was a simple tool to prove this reality to an ignorantly skeptical world. The technician is credited with the most sophisticated period of ITC history, during which researchers received not only voices, but long computer texts, clear telephone calls, and even video images appearing on television screens. The case of Charles E. Peck's final goodbye. On September 12, 2008, a Los Angeles Metrolink commuter train collided with a freight train. At least 25 people perished in the incident. One of the passengers on that train was Mr. Charles E. Peck. For over 11 hours after the accident, many of his family members received calls from his cell phone. His fiancée, his stepmother, his brother, his sister and his son all reported receiving calls. However, when they answered, all they heard was static. Returned calls went directly to his voicemail. A total of 35 calls were made from Peck's phone after the crash. The calls caused the rescue team to believe Peck was alive, but too injured to speak. An hour after the last call was made, rescuers discovered Mr. Peck. He had died upon impact. The final call came from Peck's phone at 3:28 a.m. His time of death was 4:22 p.m. the previous day. In another documented account from Rotterdam, the Netherlands, which you are seeing on your screen, a husband and wife were searching through a kitchen utility drawer for a knife-honing rod when they discovered an old, inoperative cell phone. The wife retrieved it, asking if she could discard it. Just then, a voice emitted from the device. In American parlance, the voice uttered, "Hey, what you doing?" The wife looked at her husband in shock, asking if he had heard it. He had. She commented that not only was it impossible, considering it was inoperative, they also noted that the voice sounded robotic. It was then that they realized it was the voice of his late brother. The brother was in a serious car accident. Before he succumbed to his injuries, he was required to utilize an electrolarynx or an artificial voice box in order to speak. In a related case, the woman from the previous story had another otherworldly experience with a cell phone. The woman was working as an accoutred security guard at a desolate abandoned factory. The location was infamous for having problems with unlawful intrusion and vandalism. Late in the evening, she set her phone down to complete some paperwork. The night was dead still and quiet, when abruptly she again heard that robotic voice, only this time it was emanating from her new, fully functional cell phone, and not a defunct one. The words weren't threatening, they were comforting, kindly and considerate. The robotic voice of her deceased brother-in-law said, "I like you," announcing that he heartily approved of his brother's choice of a wife. Chapter 4. Details of recorded sound. EVPs, voices within the recording. In 1959, Friedrich Jürgensen recorded birdsongs in a quiet outdoor setting. When he played the tape, he heard a voice layered within the recording, speaking clearly and addressing him directly. He recognized the voice as his mother. In German, his mother asked him, "Friedel, my little Friedel, can you hear me?" He continued recording in different locations, each session producing new voices within the playback, forming words and short phrases that aligned with his presence and attention. Konstantin Raudive expanded this work, conducting thousands of recording sessions. Over the years, he received over 70,000 EVPs. During one session, he asked a question aloud and later heard a voice respond on playback, forming a name followed by a short phrase that was Adolf Hitler. Hitler said, "Hitler ist da." In English, "Hitler is there." Speaking of Adolf Hitler, his SS leader, Heinrich Himmler's own masseur, Felix Kersten, also contributed an EVP. Masseur Kersten's EVPs were quite deep and philosophical. In one, Kersten described the spirit realm as a mirror image of Earth. Kersten commented that life on the other side feels very concrete and structural, and that in the spirit realm we have jobs and tasks. For example, he reported that some spirits are gardeners, and that his brother, who was a failed mechanic, was required to work as a mechanic on the other side until he got it right. He also mentioned the existence of familiar places, for example, hospitals and restaurants. The father of paranormal investigation and EVPs, Dr. Hans Holzer, recorded many notable EVPs. The most infamous are from the Amityville haunting investigation. In one, Holzer recorded the voice through a transmedium. The voice was of an American Indian named Rolling Thunder. Yelling through the transmedium, Rolling Thunder said angrily, "I have killed many men, and this is my land." During one of Dr. Holzer's paranormal investigations in Nevada, he captured some disturbing, yet poignant EVPs. Recorded using an extremely sensitive microphone system in the local train depot waiting area. In 1859, there was a catastrophic fire that resulted in a massive loss of life. The audio recording system was left running. At one point, the system captured the clear voice of a little girl calling out, saying, "Daddy!" Then the father's reply of, "Yes?" Subsequently, the child responds with a heartbreaking answer, "Help me." The EVP account of Father Agostino Gemelli and Father Pellegrino Ernetti, 1952. While recording Gregorian chants at the Catholic University of Milan, Father Gemelli's wire recorder continued to malfunction. In frustration, he called out to his deceased father for help. Upon playback of the recording, Father Gemelli identified his father's voice, responding to his request for help. Gemelli's father replied, "Of course I will help you. I am always with you." After his request for help, Father Gemelli had no further trouble with the recorder. The Sally House EVPs. This is one of the most well-documented cases in the United States. The setting: a modest home in Kansas, haunted by the spirit of a little girl who died during a mismanaged surgery. During one of many investigations at this location, investigators documented some of the most famous EVPs ever caught. The spirit didn't whisper, it growled a clear threat. In a deep, guttural tone, the entity said, "Swallow your soul." This capture is significant because the entity actually used a line from a popular American horror movie. The subtraction test, EVP. During an investigation for an American TV program at the Sally House, researchers wanted to ascertain if the spirit of Sally possessed intelligent consciousness. The question was asked of Sally if she could subtract 5 minus 1. The voice that answered gave the impression she was a petite and somewhat shy girl. Sally replied correctly with 4, which reinforced the story and existence of a petite 6-year-old girl named Sally who died after a botched surgery. Another investigator, asking questions of Sally, inquired if Sally knew she had passed on. He asked, "Sally, do you know you're a spirit?" Sally replied, "I'm not dead." The Black Monk of Pontefract, 1966, EVPs. This case is infamous for being an extremely violent English poltergeist haunting. The setting? A family home tormented by a spirit later identified as a 16th century monk who had been executed at that same location. During a period of intensely violent poltergeist activity, including heavy furniture being thrown around like toys and a young girl being dragged by the neck up a flight of stairs, investigators captured a voice that claimed to be a Catholic monk who had been executed during the 16th century persecution of Catholics in England. The monk claimed that after his death, his body had been discarded on those premises. A notably chilling EVP was captured following the Our Father Christian prayer. The monk responded with, "No prayers allowed here." After his daughter had been violently dragged up a flight of stairs by her neck, her father attempted to assert authority. He yelled up the empty staircase, "This is my house. You have no right to be here." To which the monk replied, a forceful, "Get out." Later in 1966, an investigator was sitting in the spandrel, the room beneath the staircase, which was the most active and terrifying area of the home. The investigator asked, "If you are the one they call the Black Monk, reveal your true name." The monk's recorded reply was, "No, not for you." Chapter 6. Details of radio, voices within the signal. Radio introduced a continuous field of frequencies, filling space with signal. Within that field, listeners began reporting voices forming within static, emerging between stations. Amateur radio operators describe calling out into open frequencies and receiving responses, short phrases appearing within the noise, aligned with the timing of their questions. The 1964 documented case of an operator recording white noise radio session asking a series of questions, leaving space between each one for answers. During playback, responses appeared within those gaps. Here is one of those sessions. Operator: "Is anyone there? Hello?" Response: "Yes, I'm here." Operator: "What is your name?" Response: "Lucille." Operator: "Where are you calling from?" Response: "The basement." Operator: "What are you doing in the basement?" Response: "I'm cold." Operator: "Are you still there?" Response: "Help me." Operator: "I can't hear you. Are you on a private line?" Response: "Dead." Although hospital records were checked, Lucille could not be identified. The drowning case, researchers placed the laptop next to a filtered scanning radio inside an empty room in a former mental hospital. When replayed, a child is heard to say, "Help me, I can't breathe." The recording ends with 15 to 20 seconds of splashing and thrashing sounds, followed by a heavy thud. then silence. Chapter 6. Details of television, image through static. Television added visual form to communication. In the 1980s, Klaus Schreiber created a feedback loop by directing a camera at a television displaying its own output. Within this loop, patterns began to form, gradually shaping into human faces. The images developed over several frames, holding their structure long enough to be photographed. Schreiber documented multiple appearances, identifying faces that carried recognizable features. In one sequence, a face formed gradually from the shifting image, becoming clearer over time before fading. The expression remained stable during its appearance, holding position within the frame. The photo mimic. While photographing utilizing a camera and film process in front of an unplugged television, the family discovered the image of a smiling little boy in the television in the developed photograph. He appeared to be inside the television rather than if he were on a TV program. The boy was mimicking the poses of the children in the room. Neighbors later identified the figure as a child named Denis, who had passed away in the same house several years prior. In other accounts, individuals described watching blank channels where static filled the screen, only to see faces emerge within the moving patterns. The features formed clearly, holding shape before dissolving back into the signal. The images carried detail, expression and presence, appearing as if shaped from within the visual field. A related occurrence is that of reports of so-called static men. There are multiple accounts that describe entities who do not appear as human figures, but as living, breathing masses of TV snow or static. These static men are reported to step out of the television and appear as silhouettes moving within the white noise of a detuned channel. Chapter 8. Details of computer communication. Language in digital form. With personal computers, communication moved into digital systems. Users reported opening documents and finding new lines of text present within their work, sentences appearing within the flow of existing writing. The text carried structure and coherence, often referencing personal details connected to the user. In one case, a man described opening a document and seeing a paragraph that had not been typed, containing references to shared experiences with a deceased friend. The phrasing matched the friend's known way of speaking, forming a sense of recognition through language. The Jack froze emails. Another report described emails received from a deceased individual containing personal references and shared memories. The messages appeared within normal email systems, formatted as standard communication. Mr. Froese died suddenly in June of 2011. 5 months later, his closest friend and his cousin received emails with the subject line, "I'm watching." In the email Jack's close friend received was written the line, "Did you hear me? I'm at your house. Clean your damn attic." The detail. Just before Jack died, he and his friend Tim were alone in Tim's disordered attic. Jack had teased Tim about the state of his attic. No one else knew about that conversation. Chapter 10. Details of social media. Messages in the present. Social media platforms hold years of communication, storing conversations, images and language patterns. Within this environment, users reported receiving messages from accounts belonging to individuals who had passed away. The messages appeared within standard chat interfaces, carrying personal detail and familiar phrasing. In one case, a woman received a message from a friend's account that had remained inactive since the friend's passing. The message referenced a specific shared moment, using language that reflected the friend's personality. The recognition came through the phrasing, the tone, the way the message was written. The Nathan and Emily case, 2013-2014. One of the most well-known and disconcerting cases involves a user named Nathan, whose girlfriend Emily passed away in a car accident on August 7, 2012. After months of silence, Nathan began receiving messages from her deactivated account. At first, the messages were fragments of their past conversations. Nathan received a message with the words, "The wheels on the bus," which was a direct quote from a chat they had while planning a sabbatical. But the trip was never taken. As time passed, the messages became more specific and seemingly sentient. In a particularly chilling exchange, the account sent a message saying, "Emily, did you make it home, Emily?" Followed by, "I'm cold." In 2014, Emily's account began tagging itself in Nathan's photos, specifically in the empty space next to him where she would have stood had she lived. In a case from Nigeria, the family of a woman who had died in 2017 reported active communication from her Facebook Messenger account years after her burial. Her younger brother received multiple Facebook Messenger voice calls from her account. During the calls, he heard her laughing at and teasing him. Web experts were hired to triangulate the IP location of the activity. The signals were traced back to the Abuja Central Cemetery where she was interred. Before I continue, please be sure to await my producer's personal story of the communication he received from his deceased fiancée in 2016. Across every stage of communication, the method evolves, moving from electrical signal to voice, from voice to recorded sound, from sound to image, and into digital text. The structure remains, communication shaped through timing, intention, and response, appearing within the systems created to connect people and spirits across distance. Now, my producer's supernatural message account. And as I promised, here are the details of my producer's personal experience with communication from a spirit. Many years ago, he met a wonderful girl and fell deeply in love with her. They were together for several wonderful years. Then, in 2015, she had an accident. She was alone in her home and fainted, striking her head on the kitchen counter. She was knocked unconscious. After suturing her wound in the hospital, they did some tests. She had experienced a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. As such, she was immediately sent to surgery. After 16 hours, the surgeons successfully repaired the rupture, and thank God she was on the road to recovery. However, a few months later, she began to have severe headaches. One afternoon, the producer stopped by her home after work. He discovered her in bed. He had thought she was merely sleeping, but when he crawled into bed with her, he realized that the girl he was madly in love with was cold to the touch. She had passed away in her sleep. Of course, he was more than devastated. It quite nearly destroyed the man. There is nothing that can bring a man to his knees like losing the woman he loves. To this very day, his heart is far from healed, and he has never married. They had her funeral on her 21st birthday. Before she passed, it was their habit to communicate on Facebook nearly every day. After her death, he would remain on Facebook for hours and hours, just hoping against hope to receive a message from her. One evening, he got his wish. He noticed a message notification from her, and when he checked, it was indeed from his beloved girl. Although it was not the long message he had hoped for, but he was so very grateful for it nonetheless. The message simply read, "Baby boy," which was her pet name for him during intimate moments. She contacted him on several more occasions, but he wishes to keep those confidential in his heart. He did, however, allow me to share one more contact account with you. After the funeral, he discovered that his fiancée had a combination safe hidden under her bed, although he didn't know the combination. One evening, as he worked at his desk, he began to telepathically hear the numbers 38 to 24, 36. At first, he ignored it. However, after a while, he felt a gentle tap upon his shoulder. It was then that he realized it was his deceased girlfriend, revealing the missing safe combination to him. The combination did indeed work. Upon opening her safe, he discovered several handwritten letters she'd composed to him before her death. He cherishes those letters and reads them often to help him remember her and the love they once shared. If you've ever experienced something like this yourself, please leave it in the comments, especially if it involved a message from someone you were close to. Please remember to visit Detailed Paranormal for all of the paranormal details.